Speaking of a even worse version of Giannis, by the way, at the foul line. Oh my God, just this. It's so it's so wild to me because when he came out of college, even going into college, Ben Simmons was insane. Like he went to LSU and they didn't even make the tournament, which is should have maybe been a red flag to begin with. That he was a talented player that couldn't get his team to the championship
Yeah.
or even into the tournament. That probably should have been a red flag to begin with. But man, Ben Simmons, for the love of God, Philly, just trade him. But just get
To
him out of
who?
there.
How?
Like
For what?
it's well, there was that trade that the Rockets nixed, where it was Ben Simmons straight up trade for James Harden, and that got nixed. The Rockets didn't want to do that trade, and so that was and then James Harden ends up going to the 76er or ends up going to the Nets. And part of that was that the old GM for the Rockets is the new GM for the 76ers. And so they probably didn't want to do a deal with their old GM in which they thought they were losing a better player in James Harden to, over for Ben Simmons. But they should have done that trade because I guarantee you the 76ers would not have lost that series the way that they did. But yeah, it's just Ben Simmons needs to get traded. He needs to go to team. You're not going to get a spectacular return on him because everybody knows that there's a specific way that you have to win with Ben Simmons now, and it's not the way that they've been doing it. And essentially the way that you have to win with Ben Simmons, which is generally what they try to do with LeBron, they try to do it with, but LeBron's more, obviously LeBron and can hit shots and everything and can take over games. So he's a little different, but it's the same concept where you basically just surround him with shooters. So for instance, if you went to the Warriors and he ran the Warriors offense with all of their shooters, he would be spectacular and they would be spectacular because he can facilitate and he can get some buckets and he's an incredible defender. It's just that when you're relying on him to be one of the primary scorers, he's not going to do that. So that's why, for instance, if he went to the Bulls, not to sound funny, but he went to the Bulls and just was a distributor, really purely, and defender, he would be ideal. That would be the ideal situation for him and if the Bulls were smart, they would sign a couple of shooters then to go with him, and then you have him basically run the point and run the offense, and everybody else is just there to basically take a shot when needed. And then you have your primary and secondary scorers that aren't Ben Simmons. The problem is that the 76ers have relied strictly on Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons. Problem with Joel Embiid, which you saw in this series, is he's injury prone. He has some kind of cartilage flap torn in his chest or something, and you could see that him wincing every once in a while as he ran up the field or ran up the court and everything. And a lot of times that translates into him not wanting to be down low and bang and do what centers do and dominate the way that he can. And so him kind of floating around the 3-point line trying to hit outside shots that he's not as good at as just banging down low is the problem. And then you have Ben Simmons, who literally, when you have a superstar on your team who's one of your main superstars and you can't play him in the fourth quarter, that's the problem. That's the problem. When it becomes a hack of Ben for the other team's benefit because they know that you can't hit free throws, that's a problem. There's no world in which you see that with any other superstar caliber player for a team. Ben Simmons is I mean, he shot, Dylan, there's a stat he shot I think 3 shots in the entire fourth quarter of that entire series. 3 shots. That's how bad it
they
is
don't
to have
trust
him on the
right?
No, he's a liability. I mean, he's having him on the court. You might as well have me on the court. It's that's the problem. That's why it's so bad. And so they need to get rid of him and they need to trade him and recoup whatever they can to get him, because I think it depends. Well, it really depends on what they want to do. They can either keep Embiid and keep Ben, in which case they're going to have to change the way that they have done their offensive scheme, and they're going to have to bring in as many shooters as possible, which they just don't really have the money for because they've given max contracts to Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid, Harris, Tobias Harris, who was basically supposed to be the third option, but at times you forget that he's there. So it's just they can keep both. They just need to immediately add all of them with a bunch of shooters around them. like, and good shooters.
So, I mean, he's going to
Or
be a salary dump. Is that pretty much what we're at right now? Like a regular season champion, but more or less a salary dump in the playoffs?
yeah, like it's gonna be because he's basically one of those where you can't play him during crunch time in important situations because the other team can A, just foul him and send him to the free throw line, or B, test him to shoot the ball. Like it's it for a defense, it's so much easier when you go, okay, this guy can't shoot, so we can leave him wide open on the line, beyond basically the key,
Yeah.
and to the 3-point line and on. And when he drives, we just foul the crap out of him and make sure he doesn't make the shot, and he's not going to hit free throws. So it's one of those where you just go like, okay, they basically do not care about him on the court. So then you're playing 5-on-4 on defense, which is not going to work in anybody's favor if any offensive team. So
Right.
that's the way that it is, and that's the way they've been playing in these important games in the playoffs. And so they either need to get rid of him or they need to get rid of Embiid and build around him. And you can't have both unless you surround him with 8 incredible shooters that swap in
Let's be
and
honest. Which one do you think they're going to stick with?
the sad part is I think that they're going to stick with both, and it's going to be one of those where they just try to switch it up a little and run it back, and
Yeah.
that's going to fail, obviously. But I think if they're going to keep one, it's going to be Embiid.
Yeah.
Because Embiid is the better player, and he's also like he should have tried a little bit more to take over and should have played through the injury better. But it's one of those where he did try at least a little bit, which was way more, and you can play him at the end of games, which is more than you could say about your other guy. So, and like I said, you can keep Ben Simmons, you just have to immediately surround him with a bunch of shooters and another really good scoring option.
Yeah.
It's going to be incredibly hard to do that in 1 or 2 off seasons unless, you're able to recoup a lot if you trade Embiid. So what's going to happen is they're going to trade Ben Simmons. The most likely situation, they're going to keep both. The better situation for their team is to get rid of Ben Simmons and recoup as much as you can for him.
Yeah. Okay.
So.
And we just have to you got to invoke a little bit of drama here, but I guess I remember I saw this earlier, but it was like the Stephen A. Smith, his report was on Ben Simmons. He doesn't work, he doesn't listen, and everyone around him is his family, and he's constantly babied.
Yeah, I heard that too.
Directly, but
that's the other problem too. Is I like you see him in the offseason, you've seen these videos where you're like, oh, here's Ben Simmons hitting a 3 during offseason. And then it's one of those where it's not like he does it during the game. So what does it matter? If he's not actually putting in significant enough time to get there, then what's the point? For example, I believe, who was it? I think was it Carlos Boozer? It might have been Carlos Boozer who it was somebody from the Bulls took 1,000 shots a day. Or no,
okay.
No, it wasn't Carlos Boozer. I think it was Chris Bosh. It was Chris Bosh developed a 3-point shot by shooting near 1,000 threes a day or something like that, or 1,000 shots a day. And it was one of those where he became a very good 3-point shooter, and there's a reason because he put in the time in a very short amount of time. So it's Ben Simmons could do that if he wanted to. He just obviously is not putting in enough work. He's obviously talented enough. It's not like he can't do it,
Wow. That's
so
1,000 a day.
It was something like that. It was something crazy. It was something crazy like that where he was, I don't, maybe it wasn't Chris, but it was somebody that was had improved their shot a ton, or their 3-point shot a ton. And it was because of that, because they were shooting basically near 1,000 shots a day. And that's what was helping them, which is what you need to do. That's not funny, but you're an NBA player at this point. The only downside to Ben Simmons' game is that he can't shoot for crap. That's the only downside. He's an athletic freak. He's massive. He's tall. He can finish at the rim. He was an incredible defender. He's an incredible facilitator. He's a extremely above average passer. He just is such a poor shooter and free throw shooter that there's just no point in playing him when you actually need buckets.
And so that's what's always really interesting about this is that I don't know if you know the context of were they forced into maxing him, or was it a situation where they had to? But
no, it's just one of those where he's a super young, talented player who, it's the whole trust the process, where those few years where they were just tanking very obviously in order to get guys like this.
Yeah.
It's the same concept. It's just that those guys finally came up for contracts. And you got to remember, too, that if you look at the 76ers in the way that they are in their situation, and they're like where they were seated at that point, is you're looking at two young players that are super talented, and you go like, oh, they'll figure it out.
Right.
They'll put in the work, they'll put in the time to figure it out. Well, one of them is doing that in Joel Embiid, and the other one is very obviously not. And so that's where their problem is. It's coming to a head in this playoffs after he's already signed a massive contract.
Yeah, and that's what I was getting at with that, is that it's interesting to me that you could get to that level and not like you could solely rely on athleticism, whatever, hype potential, and you could secure the bag and get the max contract and stuff. And then there's like these reports about you don't work, you don't spend a bunch of time and stuff. I can't say as a normal person myself, I wouldn't do the same thing, but I think it's absolutely crazy that you could still get literally, I mean, until the NBA eventually removes max contracts, if they ever do, like literally the top paying in the league and max out everything based off potential and what you've shown in limited capacities. Not that you are the top of the league and max attributed player or whatever, but that much off of potential, and you could plateau like you can imagine he is, or below plateauing, and just be fine. And he might be okay with that. That's what's crazy about it to me, is despite being in your team culture, despite being talking with your teammates every day, whatever, he might be totally fine with just being like, this is how I play, this is what it is, I'm already maxed out, whatever. And it sucks for the team, but that it's a fascinating concept. I think about that a lot.
Well, and you look at, it's funny because we'll talk about them in a minute, but the Phoenix Suns are like an incredible foil for the 76ers, because they're literally, they get Ben Simmons, the 76ers get Ben Simmons, who is this super young, talented guard, coming out of college. Suns get Devin Booker, who's a super talented young guard coming out of college. Now, granted, one of them is more of a facilitator than a scorer, and the other one's a scorer more than a facilitator. But the point still stands that they're a super young, talented guard coming into the league. What else do? They both get a super talented young center coming into the league. The 76ers get Embiid. The Suns get DeAndre Ayton. Well, then what happens is one of those super talented guards puts in a ton of work and a ton of time to get better and better every year. And, same with both centers. And then one of their guards that I mentioned doesn't do that and just goes continuously off of his current talent, which is, his talent is at a star level, but he's never going to be a superstar level talented player because of his lack of work that he's putting in on the crucial parts of his game that need it.
Yeah.
So, and that's the problem with Ben Simmons, is you literally, what your problem is. That's the thing with Ben Simmons. He knows what his problem is. He's an incredibly gifted passer, incredible defender, incredibly athletic, could do it all, just needs to shoot and hit free throws better. And that's the case. That's the case for the last 5-6 years. So just do it. Go in the offseason, work entirely on your shot every single day, put in, thousands of hours this, offseason. And guess what? You'll have a much better shot come next year if you actually put in the work and time. And it doesn't seem like he ever has done that. And that's why he's going to continuously be that. And like you said, he might be just comfortable being at the current level he's at, which is unfortunate for the team he's on. Yeah. But again, you can win with Ben Simmons. It's just there's a very certain formula that you have to follow, which is that you need to surround him with a ton of shooters. And the 76ers don't have the money to do that, and they don't have the players to do that right now on the current roster. So that's the problem, is you now are basically using two superstars that aren't well suited to play with each other, and you're going to be doomed to forever make it to the playoffs and maybe win a series or two here and there, and that's it.